David, when I was reading through your bio, the thing that struck me is that very often when I read through someone's bio and look to interview them or work with them, there's one thing in particular that sticks out, and then I can hone in on that. But I must admit, when I read through yours, I couldn't choose, which is what I wrote in the blurb. There were so many projects, and you've gone across so many diverse sectors, and you've been doing something for such a long time in so many different areas, and you have so many firsts behind your name that I didn't know what to choose. So that helped me then pull this together around success and two aspects: success in an enterprise, but also success in career. So, how would you like to kick us off on speaking about that from your viewpoint? Because that's my observation.
Thanks, Susan. I think we got to start by looking at how do we define success. Now, unfortunately, nations define success as growth in GDP. And most people know that you cannot continue to grow on a finite planet. There comes a point where you've got all the resources stretched to their absolute limit and collapse will start. So GDP is a measure. It's only 100 years old. It was developed, I think, during the Second World War, mainly to show how we can get the military machine going. And it measures things that I don't believe should be measured in the measure of a wellness of a country. For instance, if smash repairs, health and hospital costs, police, prisons are all positive in the GDP. But to my mind, in terms of a nation's well-being, they are a negative measure. So we need to get away from the measure of GDP as a measure of success. And in terms of individuals, I was disturbed to see a figure the other day from the US where 90% of new graduates from university see achieving wealth as their main number one goal in their career. Very selfish. No one listed doing good for community or society or nature as a priority. I think this is driven mainly by the gross inequality that they see when they look out to the world. They see CEOs with remunerations that are hundreds of times the average remuneration within the company. And they then say, I've got to make a lot of money to be like one of them. And that is skewing their values when they go into businesses. The term status needs to be redefined. And I think we need to go back to education and see what's going on in our schools. I've had a career where I've been battling my own profession to change the competencies of engineers, to ask them to consider societal wellness and nature in all their project work. And it's been a bit of a battle, I've got to say. Nature is not something that engineers really concern themselves with. It's get the nature out of the way so we can build this project. And what I'm sort of trying to get into the culture of engineering is no, yes, you might have to move some nature to make that project, but the end product has got to regenerate nature. Be positive in the way you bring back nature into the building, into the project.
David,
Silly things, actually, like putting birds' nests in the side of a building wall so that the birds can come back into that area.
so tell me, if business is going to be running on its business as usual way, and you're making suggestions like that, how has that been greeted over the years? Can I say over the decades? Is that okay?
Businesses as a measure of their success.
Yeah, because if business has run in a particular way, which is clearly
Yep. Yep. We'll
profit
talk a little bit
making,
later about how they measure their success, but I think
yeah,
that we need to reframe success. We need to, I've just been, sorry about that. My phone is ringing. I'll just cancel it.
that's okay. And we will pull this together into a framework for you. So I'm letting David speak at the moment and just give
Yeah.
us some ideas, and we will
We
pull
need
it
to look at
in.
redefining success of a business. And Rutger Bergman, I don't know if anyone's heard of him and seen his recent books. He talks about your company or your enterprise delivering not just a little bit better for things, but wildly better. He says that enterprises need to have the idealism of an activist and the ambition of an entrepreneur, and be able to say at the end of a project or what they do that we've made the world a vastly better place. Nature is regenerating, society is happier, our people, our staff are enthusiastic, they love working for us, and we are surviving. We're achieving rewards that are not just bottom line dollar profit measures. And I think that's the big shift that we do. We didn't just minimize our environmental damage, for instance. We
Hmm?
went beyond that and we created positive improvement in everything we did. And that's the main thing that I think the measure of success. And Bergman calls it moral ambition of an enterprise. We need
Can
to,
you tell me, sorry, could you just repeat the author's name for us again?
Rutger Bergman, Bergman, Rutger,
B
Rutger.
Bergman.
Yep, I can send you the links to his books and things, and you can put those in the post out.
Yep, that'd be great. Good to hear it just twice in case we don't catch it, because that was fascinating. And you said he calls that moral ambition. Is that
Moral ambition of an enterprise, yeah,
what a
rather than
lovely
just
term?
what they have to abide by in terms of their shareholders, etc.
Interesting. And so for you personally, when you've brought about ideas like that, has it been well accepted or have you had to battle it or
I've had to battle it. Just as an example, my company was brought into a construction project at the very early stages of their bid, and they asked me to help them inculcate sustainability into their bid so that the government would see that they were sensitive to nature and things like that. And so I met with all the senior project managers and so on. And the first question I asked them was, now, who's been in touch with the local Indigenous mob? Oh, what do you mean? What do you have to do that? I said, it's their land. This place was never ceded to the British. It's still their land. They have a place connection with it. Have you spoken with them? How do you bring them into the project? And saw that what you're proposing is sensitive to their understanding of land and nature. And it was missing. And that just thought, what's wrong with the things we're doing? Another example is when I was National President of Engineers Australia, we went round Australia with a reconciliation action plan for how Engineers Australia and engineers in general were going to approach the Indigenous population. And in presenting to it, I had engineers put their hands up and say, David, why are we worrying about that? That's not engineering. These are the sorts of things that managers and project managers particularly need to grasp. We're working on the Indigenous land. And that's something that I think if you talk to a lot of engineers, they don't understand that.
interesting, interesting. So what we'll do is pull this together into a clear framework. And just before I do that, because we've got 8 points that hopefully we can cover today, and we will mail it out to you. We'll do an email out with a recording and also the 8 points of the framework
Yeah.
because it'll be too much to capture. But I want to give you some headings as you're listening today, so you walk away thinking, okay, I've got what we, David and I, think is the emerging framework
Mm.
for success in the new economy. But before I do that, you mentioned the word sustainability. So, how do you see sustainability at the moment in 2025? And what's further on from sustainability? What's the next thing? Like, if that's behind us, what's
Yeah,
the next step?
sustainability is a huge topic. It's
You've
all
got
about
30 seconds.
sustainment. It's just sustaining what we want to sustain. And my idea of sustaining is the planet. We look at the
Mhm.
planet and we see what's happening in the systems of the planet, and they are decaying. There's no doubt now that we're headed for a climate crisis and a biodiversity loss crisis. And yet, when you look at government actions and company actions, they are not considering that at all. They're just proceeding with growth forever, measure GDP, get it rising all the time. And the net result of that is just further decay of the system. So there's a whole lot of things that need to change in terms of that. Enterprises must consider climate change when they're preparing for a plan. They must understand that the past measures, so looking at previous data, is no longer good enough. We have to think that heading into 2 degrees and 3 degrees possibility in this current century is going to be devastating to life on this earth. And nowhere are people taking that into account. It took me a long time to get the Australian Rainfall and Runoff Guide, which is engineers' manual for designing bridges and waterfront things, ports and harbours and things like that, to get them to include any understanding of climate change and the change that's coming. They do now in the latest edition, which is being revised yet again because things are changing so fast, that they'll have to think about it. And I think we need to build in resilience in our enterprise thinking, which I don't see yet. People just say, okay, we've got to design this project and then we'll sell it and we'll get away from it. No, there's no resilience left for the people that take it on. And not just resilience in your strategies, but flexibility, because change is going to be incredibly rapid. Enterprises will need to flip quickly to new things. So I think you need to always have a plan B, and you need to brainstorm contingencies. Get people into a room and just say, what if this happens? What if that happens? Are we ready for it? I don't think there's any of that thought in terms of resilience planning. So
Yep.
that's something we need to do. And that'll require a lot of changes in terms of how companies work.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's do a rapid fire framework here for people with the 8 points. So let's number these. So number one, I'm going to call that remove GDP. Can you
Yep.
respond to that?
Okay, we've talked about that one.
Okay, no recap?
Oh, it's just that we need a different measure of happiness. Like Bhutan has a happiness measure for their national wellness.
Yep, yep. That, and so that's on a company, on an enterprise level, and then
And
number
on a national level,
and on a national level as well. Are you meaning government?
governments need to stop measuring GDP as the only success of how the nation's performing.
Yep. And then number two is interesting because you and I both acknowledge that an enterprise doesn't grow on its own. It needs people within it. So number
Yep.
two is about needing a different career focus. So can you run into that a little bit?
Oh, I think, as I said earlier, that's education. We need to think back to what did you learn in school and is it appropriate when you go into a business? The term status, when you think about your status, needs
Yep.
to be redefined. Is it only measured by the wealth you earn in the time, or can you say, I did some good thing, and good
Mm-hmm.
meaning I repaired nature, I fixed a societal problem, I made people happy, that sort of thing.
Yep. So we're starting to sum up that what would make a new framework for a successful career and or a successful enterprise would be, for a start, these first three things we've mentioned, and then we've got a few more after that as well. So let's look at number three. Did I say number three already? Bringing nature in?
Number three, bringing nature into what you do. And I think we touched on that in terms of the measures that you apply to your work and your projects need to have the old star rating systems for the built environment, which I'm very familiar with. They are focused on minimizing impacts. We need to jump over the line and bring positive impacts so that nature is improved when you leave a project, that society is happier with, that things like access have been improved by your
Mm.
project, not shut off, which many projects do shut off access for people, and things like that. So that we need to rethink the measures we use, the rating systems we use, need to jump over that line to positive impacts.
Yeah, so I'm getting a feeling here, which leads really well into number four. You've already talked about measures of success,
Measure
but
success, the
if
moral
we
ambition of companies and organizations, yes.
if we pull that together, then it sounds like what you're suggesting for a new framework is people need to be really thinking. They need to be really awake and really aware, problem solving, discussing, questioning, thinking outside the box. That's what I'm hearing from today, that new
Yep.
doesn't mean be asleep, continue business as usual and tack something onto the side of it. It sounds like you're asking the human beings to wake up and be a bit different. So if you bring that into number four, measures of success, how would you summarize that for us?
The term I mentioned before, be able to say at the end of your work and at the
Mm.
enterprise is making the world a better place. You're regenerating nature, society is happier, and so on. And by the way, we're still financially viable.
Okay. And I
You
think that's
can do it. There's plenty of examples around where people are doing good for the planet and for society, and they're staying financially viable.
and I think that's the really important thing. If we step outside the community and the not-for-profit area and we
Yep.
step into enterprise, I think that's a very important message to get across, that it isn't up to the community or up to people to do the good stuff for society or perhaps go to the degree of becoming a registered B Corp. But there are actually ways that an enterprise can be financially viable and do the things that you're suggesting in the framework.
Yes.
Very important message. Yeah. So number five is, and this is an interesting one when you're thinking about it from the heading of building a successful enterprise, and we call this social cohesion and a just society. What has that got to do with building a successful enterprise?
I think as I touched on some of these earlier, but you need to be culturally aware. You need to understand the place that your project or your business is operating in. You need to bring your local Indigenous mob in and make sure that they know what you're doing to their place, their land. They have a connection with it that we tend to ignore. We need to truly grasp what that means to Indigenous people and bring that into our thinking in all your project involvement and ensure that what you're doing is equitable, that you're inclusive and you're thinking about making things better.
Okay, nice sum up. Thank you. So what I'm really interested in is when we get to number 6, which I'm going to introduce in just a second. And I know for most of you listening, nothing in itself that we've said is anything new or different if you're looking for new. What I'm finding is new about this is the pulling together of many facets which are often siloed. Enterprises, people who are career driven, projects, people, sometimes they'll be working with Indigenous people, or sometimes they'll be working to see if they could be more inclusive, or they could be redefining what success looks like for them and treating their people better. But what we're doing here is we're going around the circle and we're looking at a framework that is including all of these. Because if we're facing mega crises coming and if things are changing fast and the way to a successful career and the way to a successful enterprise is no longer a linear, predictable path like it used to, then we need to actually look around and see what is actually around us in totality, not just in a silo. So that introduces number 6, which we've called the challenges of the physical environment. So can you expand on that one a little bit more for us?
As I said earlier, there's no doubt that we're headed into a crisis in this area. And I think enterprises need to include a consideration of climate change and what the situation in the future will be. And I've mentioned contingency brainstorming. Get a group together and sit down and say, the future might be 2 degrees. How is that going to impact on the environment that we're putting this project into? And be prepared, have contingency plans. I like that term, be contingency brainstorming, that goes out beyond just, oh, it's okay, we'll build this project, we'll keep all the standards in line, we'll obey all the laws, etc. Go beyond that and think of how you can improve. Which leads us into some of the things that we're going to talk about now, Susan.
I've consulted with organisations before and I've asked about their business continuity planning.
Yep.
And they've said, yes, we've got that. And when I've looked at it, the only thing it had was a process to see what they would do if the IT dropped out. And it was as small as, here's the contact numbers for the IT department and here's the people who can come and fix it. There was no concept of the entirety of the business and certainly no concept of the physical challenges until they happened. Yeah. So I really like that because I know that you personally speak a lot about climate change and I don't want to open this up, so I'm going to say it, but then I'm going to say no response, please. There are people who don't believe that there is climate change happening. So
I don't like using the term belief with climate change. You either accept the science or you reject the science.
There are people
Belief
who
is for gods, fairies, and ghosts, not science.
And I'm going to say, even in my Byron Bay, Buntalung region, we have people who ran for council who do not accept a scientific understanding of climate change. So I really like the fact that we've called that challenges of the physical environment rather than calling it climate change. And I also like the fact that it's not just one pillar of the framework, but it's actually contained within everything as good business planning, good contingency planning to see what are the challenges of the physical environment, how are they coming and how are they going to affect us.
And it's habitat loss. We are in the 6th greatest extinction that this planet Earth has ever known. Think about that, the 6th greatest extinction. We all know about the dinosaurs going and the great previous extinction of events, but a great extinction event is termed when we have 70% or more of the species going extinct. And that's what we're heading into. And guess what? We're one of those species. So we need to think about what we're doing to the planet. That's essentially what understanding the physical environment is all about. Where do we live our home? We only have one of them. Forget this idea of going to Mars and establishing planets, establishing communities there, for heaven's sake. Send Elon Musk there and don't bring him back.
Okay, so number 7, we're looking at replacing shareholder profit. So can you run that concept past us.
Yeah, I think the problem here is that directors of organizations really only have two legal responsibilities. The first is keep me out of jail and keep the company from being charged with some crime. And the second one is ensure shareholder profit, nothing else. So as long as you keep them out of jail and you have compliance and you make money for your shareholders, the directors can fold their arms and think, oh, I've done my job. That's got to change because you've got to start thinking about the things we've mentioned. What are you doing to the environment and what are you doing to society? And is your company ethical in all respects? This is where moral ambition comes into it. You've got to
Yeah.
think about how you're
Yeah.
framing your strategies for the future.
And I know that we're using the term company, and in my head, I'm hearing that with a small c, not as an
Small c, not, yeah.
not as a legal entity. I'm hearing the use of the word company as we're just actually talking organization,
Yes.
enterprise, if you like, because that's what we called it. But we're talking organization. We're not actually talking about a company, capital C, registered legal entity.
Any
We're talking,
enterprise that we're involved with, be that a company at the moment for profit, or be it an NGO,
yeah,
non-government, not-for-profit, or be it a
yeah,
cooperative organization, or a foundation, a
yeah.
charity, whatever. They all have to look at these same principles.
Sole trader turning over
Mm,
50,000 a year or 500,000 a year, any type of organization, even a small associated or unincorporated association group of people wanting to get together and do good things. This is still a framework to say, look around and let's see how we can interconnect all of these different aspects.
yeah.
Because as soon as you do that, you get the network effect happening. You get to see that one part of the framework in your organization, whatever it might be, even if you're a sole trader or you're a solo operator, can connect in with a huge organization that's doing something as well. I just wanted to bring up the term because I was hearing company and I realized it wasn't a registered
Thanks,
legal
Susan.
entity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we've been talking about shareholder profits. So what we were talking about there, a shareholder does, of course, relate more to a company that does have shareholders, but we're using that because often the damage that the average person looks at in society is caused by a registered legal entity of a company and very complicated structures with a duty, a legal duty to return profit to the shareholders. So rather than saying replacing shareholder profit, we could say moving towards what? What would you call that?
Moving towards those things we mentioned before about what good have I done for the planet, for people, nature, everything, and not
Mm-hmm.
just minimizing the impacts of your organization's impact on things.
Yeah, so more engagement with
More,
stakeholders and
yeah,
finding out.
absolutely more engagement stakeholder. And don't forget nature is one of the stakeholders.
Yes, yes. And I always leave a seat at the table, the board table, if I'm meeting with boards or any workshop I run, I always have a seat for nature. And I was inspired to do that from that company in England that has nature officially on its board.
Yeah,
And if people want to know more about that, the recent documentary film called Future Council by Damon Gameau,
got it.
Future
Yeah,
Council, takes a group of kids in a big yellow bus around Europe
yeah,
and goes into boardrooms and speaks with CEOs and asks the questions from a kid's very logical point of view. Why are you doing this? Why aren't you changing?
yeah.
Yeah. So then consequence of that is they have nature on a couple of boards that wasn't represented before and children's voices represented on boards as well.
And we recognize enterprises, corporations as a legal entity, as a being in the legal system. We need to recognize nature, like New Zealand recognizes rivers as having a person status.
Yes,
And we need to think
absolutely.
about ecocide. This brings in, if you're damaging nature, you're destroying a person in a way. We're trying to get ecocide as an international crime in the Roman statutes of Rome,
So
genocide
really
and homicide and so on. Yeah.
it's a really nice segue into our eighth point, which is legislative frameworks. You just started touching on that. So
Yeah,
consideration.
what is the legislative framework? It's there's all the laws that the company's operating in that has to look through those and understand the limitations that the laws that the current legislation might impose on the organization. But things are creeping in. Years ago, we had the legislative requirements around environmental impact statements and the what is known as the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, which is currently under a dreadful review by various governments. It's got to be changed and it's got to be brought up to date. At the moment, it's more or less a rubber stamp for coal and gas projects to just keep going. But last year, we had new sustainability reporting requirements were introduced. They came into effect late last year, and they are reporting your sustainability impact, not just your EIS from a project, but the company's whole activities in terms of sustainability are to be measured and reported. And that sort of brings me into the conference coming up, not this weekend, but the next weekend in Broadbeach on the Gold Coast. Terence Jayaretnam is coming from ex-EY. He was an EY leader of sustainability for the Australasian group of EY. And he's well across all of the sustainability requirements. He ran a company initially called Net Balance, which was just a pure sustainability implementing company. He's an environmental engineer, very well versed in the legislative framework in which organisations have to operate these days. So just a plug for the conference weekend after this coming weekend.
You're
Come down
running
and
2
join
or
us.
3 sessions, aren't you, during the
I've
conference?
got four speaking sessions that I'm involved with. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other legislation, the Corporations Act must change. Because at the
Mhm.
moment, the only obligation in the Corporations Act is you must make shareholders money. That's the only requirement. No mention of preserving nature or protecting, making sure that the society's better off, that sort of thing. It seems that if you make money, then you're making society better off because the shareholders will be happy with their income from profit. So that has to change too. Not just the EPB and C Act and the requirements for reporting, but the Corporations Act has to change.
Yes, for people who are registering as a company, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so coming back to the conference as we wrap up, there are tickets still available for it on neweconomy.org.au. I have sent that out to you. It's at the Gold Coast. It is an in-person live event at Broadbeach Cultural Centre. David, as he explained, has got 3 or 4 sessions running through it. We've got particular threads going through the conference that actually meet Nina's purposes in how do we get a group of people together to share expertise, wisdom, ask questions. It's a bit of a think tank. We run these every 2 years, and then to see what we feel are, for this line in the sand now in 2025, what do we feel is the emerging way forward towards a new economy and away from an old economy that's not serving us? And if you have any questions about that, you're welcome to ask David or me or email us back on the registration link. But David, one thing I wanted to say, it does tie the conference in a little bit, but it very much relates to the topic we've spoken about today as we draw it to a close. When you're speaking about legislative frameworks, for example, I know that for some people they think, oh, that's just big organisations turning over 500 million or whatever. What recommendations would you give to a smaller organisation?
I don't think that the same recommendations to that. They're running a business that's doing things that will impact somewhere. So even sole traders. My company was a small consulting business for 20 years. I had to consider everything I did and what I went out to my clients. First thing I used to say was, do you understand sustainability? Do you know what's going on in your company in terms of sustainability? And that's just, now I'm a sole trader. I don't do big consulting jobs anymore. But the same thing would apply. It doesn't matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it leads into the final things I want to say, Susan, if I may.
Yes, this is our big promise that what is David's
Yeah, I
ultimate
think
tip for us
we
coming from.
understand that business has to be more caring. We have to build it around consideration of nature and society and not damaging the planet. And I would say that you should become a driver of change, given the things that I've said and that Susan has said. Challenge everything. The physical environment is rapidly changing. Technology is overtaking us, and there's a huge lag in legislation catching up with it and education. So we've got to be careful that technology doesn't overtake us. Society values are also shifting. We need to keep across them. That means you have to do your own research. In challenging everything, be sure that what you read is giving you credible truth. Watch out for social media. Just remember that social media is owned and run by the elites, the billionaires, whose agenda is vastly different from yours. So be very careful when you're using social media or Wikipedia, for instance, as your source of knowledge. Wikipedia can give you quick understanding of something, but they'll have a lot of references in there that you should go to check the credibility of what you're reading. So that's my caution. Challenge everything, seek the truth in what you're talking about, and be
Mhm.
wary of the hoaxes and the misinformation that's flooding social media.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great note to end on. And shameless plug for Nina as well. That is the reputation that Nina has, which is to be trustworthy and credible. So it is
Absolutely.
actually a trusted organization by a lot of people. I know for myself, if I want to know something, I might read it online or through social media, because where else do we get information? But then I'll go to my trusted advisors. I might go to somebody like David who has expertise in a particular area, or Tarek, or somebody else I know, and get their viewpoint on it to see from a real human being that I can touch, even though I can't touch on Zoom. So that theme of trust is really important as well. So
Yeah.
we are going to make an official end to today. So this is it for those of you who need to leave. Thank you very much. If you do have questions, then you're welcome to raise your virtual hand or your physical hand and wave at us, and we'll unmute you for a physical question. And just while I'm seeing if somebody does have questions, we have a comment, which is a shameless plug from Claire Fountain, saying that she's running a session at the NENA conference on co-ops for people who's interested in cooperatives. And we've got, I didn't realize we had this happening. And JP as well is beaming in for a session. Yes, JP, you're doing something called Human Fi and Planet Fi, beaming in for a session on applying current tech to creating community-led parallel economies. Fascinating. That is all on the NINA program. This wasn't meant to be an ad for NINA, but I'm glad we've got people here supporting the conference. Okay, so who has questions for us? Tarek, can you see any hands raised or people waving at us? I can see smiles, so that's lovely. Thanks, Tom, for your smiles. Lovely.
I can't see any hands raised, but there were a few questions further up in the chat. If you scroll.
Yep. So we've responded to the one about somebody was questioning why we're using a structure of a company. So we've clarified we were talking around a small C company as an organization. And the person, Libby Stewart, suggested, why are we not improving governance, for example, working as a cooperative? NINA itself is a cooperative. So we do work voluntarily within a cooperative. We do support that as well, but we would refer to that as an organization. And what other questions did we see? A shift, JP commenting that there's a move afoot to move from sustainable to regenerative.
Yep.
I know for myself, as I heard terms like regenerative coming in, very quickly within a few months, there were people bagging regenerative, saying, oh, it's just another form of greenwashing. So we're really challenged, aren't we? As soon as we settle on a word where we think, oh, this is the thing that's capturing it, immediately there are people who start to find the fault and the flaw in that term, and we just have to keep going with whatever words we've got, doing the best we possibly can. Tarek, any other questions in the chat that we've missed?
No, not that I can see.
Great. Looks like we've got a lot of people thinking
There's
that.
one hand up.
Oh, who is it? Who is it? This is
Yeah,
exciting.
hi.
Dougal.
Dougal, hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm zooming from New Zealand. I'm having trouble understanding your accents, but I think I got
Sorry
the
about
gist.
that.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to say, David, thanks very much for your comments. I belong to a group over here called Wise Response, and we have a constant discussion about the role of energy and just how to energy in supporting sustainable society and where that's headed, and the degrowth, greenwash versus each other. And I wondered if you had anything to say about the sort of degrowth initiative, whether you think it's going to go anywhere.
And just
And
before
also, Sorry.
Before David responds, for people listening, could you please explain what degrowth is? Because not everyone understands the term or may not have heard it.
It's simply the opposite. In a way, it's the opposite to chasing GDP. It's reducing consumption to fit more effectively within resource flows, on the assumption, David said at the start, we're on a finite planet. Unless we eventually start cutting back on our use of everything, including fuels, we're going to hit a wall.
Yep, thank you. That's great.
That
that's
idea.
great.
But the person that I've found really helpful, and I just again wondered if David had a comment, is Jason Hickel, and some of his suggestions around. He's written a book called Less is More, which I found really helpful in finding a way forward that looks like it's doable, and it's essentially around getting policies to move towards public good rather than private good. And we've got a government here is doing exactly the opposite at the moment.
That reminds me of Amory Lovins. He did the less is more trick with his natural capitalism too.
Oh, yeah.
So
I'll stop there. That's my thoughts. Yeah.
Just on terms of renewable energy, there's a session on the Friday of the conference where we're going to talk about energy and climate. And we have Simon English coming in with me to talk about the current power system in Australia, the current regulations around it, and how hopeless it is to cope with the renewable energy situation. There's a big need to change the regulatory environment of our energy system, because it's all geared to, when we sold off the power stations to private enterprise, and half of them are owned by China, etc., it's all geared to how they make their money, how they make profit out of our energy system. And that needs to change, because renewable energy is, as you understand, feeding back the other way. It's not big centralized power stations feeding out to the suburbs. It's beyond the suburbs now, feeding back into the city along the same power grid. And we have to change the power grid. And Simon's fully versed in that. And it's a lot of rubbish that you hear from people who are trying to keep the power station, the big coal power stations going. A lot of rubbish.
It's great. And I'm looking forward to that session, because you've promised you're going to demystify all that technical stuff. And I do, Tom, who's very patiently waiting with his hand up. So this will be our last question. Tom, thank you for waiting. What would you like to ask us or David?
Oh, yes. Thank you. And you're a great session. And I was just maybe more of a comment, but maybe if David has heard of things like the planetary boundaries framework and donut economics.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All under that sort of post-growth area. That's the umbrella term now. And and speaking as a former
right across it, Will Steffens was a good friend of mine. He unfortunately died 2 years ago. He was there with the Stockholm Resilience Institute and helped establish all the frameworks around the planetary boundaries. And I use them a lot when I'm talking about climate change and not just the climate's just one segment of the boundaries here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So speaking as someone who's actually an engineer as well in my past, and I'm now.
No, you're still an engineer. Once you've framed your mind around engineering, you're always an engineer.
You can't escape the STEM thinking.
That's right.
And which is useful, because I've got a business and now I'm trained as an economist in the sustainability of the economics of sustainability. This is some of those things you're bringing up, say, in defense of the project engineers and project managers. They all have clients, and the clients have got to give them a brief that they've all attended for, and those briefs don't include those things that we're asking for there to think about those broader issues. So I can imagine each project manager, you're talking about going and seeing the Indigenous people and all these other aspects, their first thing they'll be thinking about is that's extra cost, extra time, and they've got
that's it.
Don't
forget life cycle analysis too.
So we need to be thinking from top down, driving the changes. That has to come from the client, whether it's a private sector or public sector client, that these are the things we need to embed, which is really going to the heart of our economy and how we think about our economy. So,
that's a good point, Tom. An example I can raise is Arup as a consulting firm.
Yeah.
They have a sustainability policy that they ask clients to sign onto. And if the client doesn't accept that sustainability policy, they won't engage them as a client.
That's good. But a lot of sustainability with respect to it, in particularly corporate, is in the green growth which is basically neoliberal, market driven, and that's part of the problem. And it's all about it's all about decarbonising the energy system, which is mission critical to do.
You're talking to someone who's well involved in the establishment of Green Buildings Council and the infrastructure green.
I'm going to draw this to a close. Tom, thank you so much for your insights.
Thanks,
and
Tom.
what you are opening up here is we've got so many topics where we can drill down deeper onto these types of issues. Thank you so much for bringing that up. David and I are just overwhelmed with the amount of stuff we could be talking about. So we welcome you to come, all of you to come to our future sessions. That
3
we're going
days.
to
talk
welcome
ages.
to come to the conference and welcome to come to our future webinars as well, because Tom, I really appreciate that you've gone into depth, and they're really important things that we do need to talk about. We can't just throw it out. So the 8 points is a framework for you to take away, and then we can drill down on it. And because you signed up through Humanitics, if you actually follow the hub here on Humanitics, then it's really easy for us to just send a message out to you to say, hey, we're running a new webinar. If you'd like to attend, of course, you're really welcome to, rather than emailing, because Nina's run by volunteers, and then that's triple handling if we do it that way. So thank you very much. Signing off. Didn't mean to cut any of you off with your super comments. David, thank you so much. That was fascinating.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, thanks, Tarek, for administering this.
Thanks, Tarek, and thanks, Tom, for your questions, and thanks, Dougal, as well, and everyone else who put comments in the chat. See you soon.
Great.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.